Linda Mahon O, composer, jazz bassist. Welcome to Cultural Attaché.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I want to talk about your incredible album, The Glass Hours, which you're on tour now, or soon will be on tour
Hmm.
promoting and performing live. Um,
Mm.
that album was released in June of 2023. So
Mm.
for an album to be released in June of 2023, it means that you probably recorded it in 2022, would be my
Mm.
guess, and that the compositions predate that time as well. So I'm wondering
Hmm.
how your relationship to these 10 compositions that you created and these 10 performances that we can hear on the album, how has that relationship changed and evolved over time?
Yeah, so most of these pieces were composed, or at least the first incarnation of them um, were composed around about 2018 or so. And we first performed that music at the end of 2019 at the Jazz Gallery here in New York City. And this was at a time where we were nearing the end of the Trump presidency. There was a bit of uncertainty of what was going to happen next politically. And I was just questioning a lot of things, a lot of our values, a lot of the systems within which we live. And I was really thinking about how we value time and what we choose to do with it in our temporary time span that we have here on this earth. And a lot of the music revolves around just some of these values and these struggles that we deal with day to day, living within these organized systems within which we work, we exist in, you know. Um, so initially, some of these songs were formed as a result of questions that I was asking myself about what I was doing in my life and as an artist. And this was at a time when I was searching for some other things. I was composing and playing a lot, touring a lot, but also trying to learn new things. I did a short course on Coursera in international human rights law to learn more about those things. Those very confusing um, uh, definitions of what is just in terms of how we deal with warfare and violence and between countries uh, and also assessing my amount of privilege too, that I can work here with music in a space where many people before me have fought on my behalf for my freedoms. And I have the sheer luck of being born in a place where I don't have to be conscripted or um, or be in some sort of position of armed conflict. And I was questioning a lot of things of how we value life and how confusing it seems of how we can regulate women's bodies in one way in order to preserve life, but then not provide um, adequate regulations when it comes to gun control and protecting our kids in schools, and also within the healthcare system as well. So all these things culminated in these songs. The first song is something I wanted to start the album off with a bang. With Circles, and that's a song that questions our values when it comes to searching for happiness, especially through material possessions, and thinking if we find, if we buy the next car, the next iPhone, the next house, we're going to be happy, and that never-ending treadmill that we find ourselves on. Jus ad bellum was a result of the course that I was taking on Coursera. Jus ad bellum is the justification for going to war, um, and some of those lyrics reflect some of the sorrow that I have and the privilege that I feel as a person that hasn't really had to live that or live through that myself. Chimera is about striving for the seemingly unattainable in my mind. And I will have to say that although these compositions started in 2018, they evolved a lot throughout the years. Um, as you may or may not know, the pandemic hit in in 2020, and And that was, yeah, it was a difficult time for all of us, and, it shifted some of these compositions, for me personally. A lot of them evolved, went many different directions, and then I added some other songs. The Imperative is about grit and resilience, which I think we all had to think about during this time.
Let me ask you if
Hatchling.
let me ask you if I may. You
Mhm.
know, was the composing of these pieces an opportunity for you to try to come to answers for yourself for these, or to pose the questions so that you can posit that out there for the rest of us to take in and use your music as a way of thinking about these things?
I would say the latter, because I think a lot of these issues are so complex that it is really hard to find a definitive answer to how to solve these problems and how to answer these questions. And I, I use music for a lot of different things. I want to bring something beautiful into the world. I also want to use it to question things, and I also want it to use it in a way that can um, uh, make an impact in some way, make a shift in someone's consciousness, when they hear it. Um, and yeah, I would have to say the latter, putting it out there. And I think I use music in many ways uh, to, to really, um, if I'm sort of confused or wondering about something, music is really helpful for me in order to just at least digest it. I'm not necessarily looking for answers, but this is my expression of how I'm feeling, what I'm questioning.
Now, what you're questioning on the glass hours are some of the basic ideas that we have been contemplating for, decades, if not centuries. I
Mm.
mean, you're dealing with the idea of nostalgia and constantly staying in what was instead of moving forward. You're dealing with repeating the past, with the devastation of war, and the other concepts that you've brought up. Do you think that we will ever get to a place where these questions don't have to be asked? And can your music play a part in getting us to that point?
I feel like these questions are always somewhat going to be asked. There's an element of there where there's just so much of history repeating. You might hear that some of those themes in antiquity and in Jus ad bellum. But I have faith that things can improve. It's yeah. I'm not entirely sure how, and I think about ways in which I want to do better, day to day. I think a lot about morality and also now with a child, just actually how we teach morality and how certain themes in stories that we teach kids, um, whether it be through books or movies, sometimes they aren't as clear cut and dried, and I'm always questioning how I am to do better and how I can contribute, whether that means thinking about who I donate to, um, which causes I want to speak about, and also just the people around me that I can positively affect, And if I can put some of these questions out there, I hope more and more can be done.
It strikes me that choosing this time with so many questions to be a parent is the greatest vote of confidence that things will get better. And I'm wondering if you look at it that way.
Yeah, I mean, um, yeah, I think, I mean, I wish. I was talking to a colleague the other day of just um, how much I wish that every kid on this earth right now could just be a kid, And I just recently wrote a song for Michael Mayo, who I mentioned I was recording with today, and we just performed it at Lincoln Center, revolving around that. And I hope we can do better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you bring a child into this world unless you think that we can, unless you have faith
Yes.
that we can. And I
Exactly.
say that as an uncle many times over.
Yeah.
Now, to take it a little bit away from the intense part of your music, there is also the live performance of your music now, which people are going to get a chance to experience. And I'm wondering, what does live performance give you in terms of opening up your compositions, or perhaps the way you hear and perform them, and not just the way you do, but also your colleagues who are on the stage with you?
Yeah, so I love playing with these musicians. And the musicians on the record, Sarah Serpa on voice, Obed Calvera on drums, Mark Turner on tenor saxophone, and Fabian Almazan, my partner, on piano and effects. Um, Nothing beats live music, and especially when the music that we create is always so different each night to night. We may maintain some of the same messages and maintain some of the framework of these compositions, but ultimately, so much of what we do is improvised and special to that specific moment. And I'm lucky to play with musicians who are very experienced in improvisation and are sort of ready for anything to happen. I also think someone like Sarah Serpa, if you've never heard Sarah's music, go check it out. Sarah has a very beautiful voice that I liken to a really full-bodied red wine. And what I love about it too is that she has a vulnerability that's understated. It's not one of these voices that you will hear that's sort of overly over the top or dramatic, but it still maintains that emotion and vulnerability, which I think is just perfect for these songs.
It's interesting because as you're talking, I'm a lapsed piano performance major. You can probably see a piano, over my
Yeah.
shoulder.
Mm.
Um, but it seems to me like a lot of the questions that you're bringing up in your music could be solved by what you and your bandmates have to do every night, which is just listen.
Mm. Yes, right. Listening,
I mean,
teamwork.
can't music provide a lot of, regardless of whether anybody gets the message behind the music or not, can't the idea of live performance of music actually serve as a foundation for solving a lot of our problems?
Yeah, yeah, I often think that, I work with a lot of students of varying ages, and I always say that everybody should learn how to improvise, learn how to play in an ensemble, because there's so much to be said about problem solving, working together, empathy, listening, um, that really carries through into everyday life. And whether or not some of these students choose to pursue music as a career, you've got these skills, that you can use anywhere. And it's incredible. It's really something special.
Um, how important do you think it is for people listening to understand the point of what you're getting to with each individual composition? Or is it okay? Is it enough that they enjoy the music?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everyone's gonna perceive this music and any art, in general, uh, in their own individual way. And at the end of the day, if I can invite the listener to be in the moment and embrace just the here and now by listening, that's kind of my number one goal first, because I think everyone's coming from such a different place and headspace, um, and people listen for very different reasons. And um, at the end of the day, I hope that people can see some of the emotion, the message behind the songs, but at the end of the day, it's their own take, and as long as they're in the moment and listening, I'm good.
And as long as their cell phones don't go off in the middle of your performance.
Yeah. Yep. As long as they're not checking Instagram and scrolling.
Right.
Mhm.
Now, your first album that I'm aware of was Entry, which came out in
Mhm.
2009.
Mhm.
What stands out to you most when you revisit that recording about the artist you were then and the
Mhm.
artist you are now?
Mm. Huh. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I feel like there are certain things that have developed in terms of my sound and my ideas, and they're a lot more fully formed. Um, I, with that album. Um, I it was such a special time. This was, living in New York City at a time where I was just gigging as much as I could, doing all sorts of jam sessions through to the early hours of the morning, and quite an exciting time when I look back at it. Um, and but not an easy time for sure. And there's this grit and determination that I remember back then. Which I still feel that I have and I maintain, but there's something about that specific time, and that's kind of why I called it entry, is that it is a journal entry of a very special time, living in New York with, playing so much music and being around so many incredible musicians, and that hunger, when you're in your mid-20s and just playing all the time. Um, yeah, I mean, I just kind of see it as another journal entry, and I feel like certain things have grown since then. My sound and some of my um, decisions. I definitely think that the older I've gotten, especially as a parent now, that there's something where I feel like. There's less maybe that I feel I need to prove. It's more just about creating and, um, taking risks in a different way.
Well, I think I think it was your second album, had a cover of a song from West Side Story, Something's
Mhm.
Coming.
Yeah. Mhm.
And as your albums have progressed, covers have disappeared. You have gotten to a space where your music is enough. What
Mm.
was that process like of getting to the place where you could say, you know what, I know there's a long history in jazz music of doing covers of other people's music, but I I am equally valid as a composer and I can move on with just my own work.
Yeah. It wasn't really necessarily something I thought too much about. I mean, definitely with the Glass Hours, it's just that all of that music was pertinent to these themes, and I didn't really feel that there was anything else that I wanted that related to those themes, Aventurine, which was the album before, it did have a couple of covers, in the sense that I wanted to feature the string quartet in some way, Time Remembered, Bill Evans' Time Remembered, and then Au Brevard, Charlie Parker's Au Brevard was something I wanted to just turn right upside down and flip like a Rubik's cube, um, just to play around with. It wasn't necessarily something I really thought much about. It was just what was necessary for the album as a whole piece.
Right. So if you were writing these pieces 4 and 5 years ago, I would assume you haven't stopped writing as a result of that time.
Mm,
And I know that you've had collaborations with other artists, who have been performing your music, etc.
mm,
You know, The Glass Hours is an extraordinary album, but I assume you have something else up your sleeve that we'll be getting a chance to hear soon or in the not too distant future.
mm.
Where's your mind taking you these days?
Yeah, so I premiered a commission last year that was for percussion trio, percussion ensemble, and piano trio. I'm quite proud of it. It's called Ephemeral Echoes, and it all pertains to things that are ephemeral or temporary. And There's different movements. The first one relates to just that first meeting of someone new. Um, and there's one movement that's literally about ephemeral objects that have made to be ephemeral, been made to be ephemeral. In essence, planned obsolescence. The technique that companies can implement in order to sell more products is to make products that will break easily or have a limited time lifespan. So that involves these light bulbs, these cut glass light bulbs. That particular movement is called the Phoebus Cartel, which is a cartel that in the 1920s, a secret cartel, a light bulb cartel that um, operated all around the world and basically mandated that light bulbs could only last 1,000 hours. And this was in order to sell more light bulbs. Um, and they would even find people who would make light bulbs that would last longer than 1,000 hours. And there's even still a light bulb in California now that's still burning after about 100 years. So for that particular piece, it's about planned obsolescence and the result of what that is, especially the tolls that takes on humans and the environment and the world that we live in. So the percussionists are playing these cut glass light bulbs. They're quite thick, but they're really interesting sound. And yeah, so it's a work that I hope we can get recorded soon. Though, and it does incorporate some lighting in the project, so hoping to perform it somewhere else and record it.
Well, I think you should talk to the LA Phil and get them to
Yeah.
program it. That would be great.
Yeah.
On January 9th, the Grammys
Mhm.
website posted a story about, alternative jazz and included the Glass Hours as an example of alternative jazz. What
Mhm.
does that or any other label mean to you as it relates to either your music or how other music is categorized?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, um, I don't think too much about labels when it comes to actually making the music, but I do see how it's necessary for writers, for people in the industry in order to categorize or to promote certain things, publicize what this music sounds like, it kind of is what it is. I know a lot of people have fought very hard to get this new genre into this new category into the Grammys, which is amazing, and I'm proud of a lot of people who are rallying for more space for improvised music that isn't mainstream, that isn't pop music. That's you know, a lot of it is quite improvised, So I'm all for giving more space and more recognition to some of these musicians.
And let's be clear, a lot of pop music, for some godforsaken reason, takes 9 to 15 people to write,
Yeah.
as opposed to the ten pieces on your album, which took just you.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. So
Mm,
obviously the jazz world is famous for collaborations, and that's I think what makes it all one of the most in one of the most interesting genres of music that there is. And you've had the
mm,
privilege of working with Vijay Iyer and with Ethan Iverson and with Billy
mm,
Childs and Terry Lynn Carrington and Tashawn Sorey. And I'm wondering how artists like that, both the older ones and younger ones like Tashawn Sorey, have inspired you and informed who you are as a musician today.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we just start with Tyson Sorry, I mean, he is just a force of nature. And as a bass player, I just feel so lucky to be able to play with so many incredible drummers. And Tyshawn is not only an incredible drummer that you could riff with him on Max Roach and all the masters, but I can also show him some of my percussion scores. And I showed him my solo piano piece, and he can comment and you know immediately he's telling me all the scores to check out. You can talk to him about Xenakis, you can talk to him about George Lewis. It's really quite incredible how well versed Tyshawn is in so many different worlds. He's just a real force of nature, with crazy perfect pitch, like razor perfect pitch. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm super inspired by some of these musicians that they've dedicated their lives to this art form and they take it so seriously.
Well, and
And
there's a new album coming out with Vijay Iyer, Tashawn, and you,
mm,
right?
yeah, yep, yeah. And Vijay is a classic example of somebody who's extremely well versed in many different worlds. Um, and super inspiring. Someone like Terry Lynn Carrington, I mean, she's just a visionary and not only one of my favorite drummers, but as a composer, producer, a band leader, but also, I've seen her in many leadership contexts where she really cares. There are a lot of people in these positions of power, positions of leadership that um, that may or may not do it for their own egoistic purposes. And Terry Lynn is just one of those people that is just absolutely not that. It is she really cares about the people that she is trying to work with and making things better, making things more equitable. So she's someone that's deeply inspires me. And with her is also Jerry Allen, who I got to spend some time with before she passed. And um, yeah, I have to say I'm just extremely lucky to work with some of these visionaries.
Right. Well, I want to ask you as my last question about something that Vijay told me when I interviewed him in 2019.
Mm,
Uh, and I asked him about a quote that he gave to NPR in an interview 2 years prior, where he said, "The reason we're on this planet as individuals is to express and reflect the moment we're in." Now,
mm,
clearly that's something you agree with, but I followed up by asking him, are the moments getting easier to express and to comment on, or tougher? Because it seems like the world is becoming a more chaotic place. Now, that was 4 years ago. I don't know that it's gotten any less crazy in that time, but you're an artist, you're a composer, you're a musician, you're a mother. Do you feel like we're headed in the right direction? And I believe your reason on the planet is to do exactly what he said, to express and reflect the moment we're in. How would you describe the moment we're in right now, particularly in this country as we head towards an election?
mm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel some uncertainty and uneasiness, to quote Vijay's last album. But I don't know. I mean, I like to have faith, and I will have to say that I'm constantly reminded of of incredible people, day to day, and I try and make sure that I acknowledge them, in my life in terms of people who want to strive for better. Um, it's hard to say, like, is it getting easier? The state of the world. I mean, with things like climate change and those issues, which I feel we should be doing a lot more about. Maybe not. Um, there are still, positive things happening in the world in terms of advancements in technology, or um, it, in certain parts around the world to solve certain problems, and it's important to acknowledge those things. And I'm not sure. At this particular time, I mean, it is a very tumultuous time. I try and keep as up to date with the news as I can, at the same time knowing that we're so, um, it's just so much more readily available now. Or a lot of the news that we hear, can be very heartbreaking, um, and I feel like there's a point where, um, you know, uh, it positive news is always a really good thing, and I think it is um, good to welcome that. But at the same time, I don't know, easier. I don't know. I mean, I feel very privileged uh, in my particular life to be doing what I'm doing, and I just hope for better. I have faith that we can do better.